into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America.
Thank you for listening to Pod Damn America. Anders Lee here with co-host Alex Butak.
Thanks for having me on, Anders. Thrilled to be here.
And our regular main centralized host. That's what
our centralized host.
Our centralized host. He is out. He has been boosted, and I guess he can't podcast.
Dr. Fauci has performed a hit on Jake Flores for getting too close to the truth about club comedy.
That's right. That's what they're doing. Is that the vaccines? They are tainted. If you are a cuck,
I saw some shit thing earlier about people being like, when you get the boost, does that update the software on the microchip from the first one? And
someone was actually asking.
Yes.
Clearly,
the Bill Gates microchip.
Yes, but we are joined by a Minneapolitan, a journalist now writing for Mother Jones, and someone I believe I was in a Sife circle with 10 years ago in Minneapolis, and that is Eaman Whalen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
I don't know if I should say that Sife part.
Like a rap cipher?
Yeah, like a cipher.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I remember Outside of Honey. Let's clarify, neither of us were participating in it.
Oh, I was thinking
MCs.
I thought Sife meant, a little.
Oh, got it. Okay.
I don't know if you can say that
Sife
on air.
That's right.
Is weed legal in Minnesota?
Good question.
No, it's ridiculous. It's there's so many states that have got it before us that it didn't make sense. But it's because we have one of the only split legislatures in the nation.
Because I know Governor Santa up there, Tim Walz, wants to make it legal, right? He looks like Santa.
Yeah, it's within the Democrats here. It's very mainstream across the state, I would say, but it hasn't caught on with the Republicans yet.
Damn.
Santa as a figure is historically anti-weed because it reduces your motivation. It keeps you from. He operates on slave labor, and without that, if you have all the elves relaxed, sitting down, singing songs, eating snacks, they're not making Blu-ray discs that are going to go to landfill. They're not making novelty hats that are going to go in a landfill. All these things that can be thrown in a landfill later are then. Well, they're not made, and the children of the world take notice.
I think sativa Santa would be okay with, for the elves specifically.
It's true. This shit makes you psycho. You're allowed to freak out on Santa's watch.
Yeah. But
that would be a great law. Only sativa is legal.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I could definitely see that happening because it's the most industrious sort of. Is that something, a law that Jacob Fry would support? He's going to legalize sativa?
He's definitely pro-legalization. He's just.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's pro. He's been for a while, even when he was in city council, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I would love to take blue-collar police force people and be like, hey, guys, so you have to learn a lot about weed now. You have to get microscopes.
Well, the article you've written is entitled "When Communists Ran the Co-ops," and if you're from the Twin Cities, the term co-op will resonate as a grocery store. That's I moved to St. Paul when I was 12 years old, and we lived by Mississippi Market. And there are a bunch of these places that are green. They say natural foods on the awning, and they sell health foods, and they're a co-op. I feel like a lot of people in the Twin Cities who grow up around co-ops don't necessarily understand. It took me till I was older to really process what this actually means, what it means to be a cooperative business. But what was you grew up in Minneapolis, what was your conception of co-ops as a kid, and how did you learn about this?
That's such a funny thing that you say, because I had the exact same experience, because I went to San Francisco for college. And the first time I was living on my own, and I was like, okay, I'm going to find the co-ops here. San Francisco, it's got to have co-op. You know,
Yeah.
every big liberal city has a network of co-ops, and there's one. There's like Rainbow in the Mission, and there's not many others. I don't think there's any others. You know, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but and then my mom, I like asked my mom, like, what the hell? And she was like, yeah, Minnesota's kind of like the home for that. That's sort of like where it started in the heart of it. And so she has been a Wedge member, which is one of the oldest ones, which is right in the Wedge neighborhood and Franklin and 22nd or sorry, Franklin and Lindale or 22nd and Lindale. And yeah, so I grew up going to the Wedge, still go to the Wedge, went there the other night. But now they've grown into, or, you know, there's 5 just within Minneapolis, a bunch in St. Paul, and now they're spreading all in the burbs. But yeah, I had the exact same experience. And then this summer, sort of radical organic farmer friend of mine was like, hey man, have you ever heard of the co-op war? And I was just like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's like Maoists and hippies, and they're like fighting about the co-ops. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? I have to find out everything about this. So
Yeah, it's funny. I was saying before the show, I spent a lot of time as a teenager on Wikipedia. I was a nerd, but not a smart nerd. It's a tough combination to be a nerd who's also stupid, because I wasn't able to find the 4chans and the Reddits and places to actually talk to people. I only made it as far as Wikipedia, and that's where I spent my time getting useless information. And one of those things, I just looked up the letter O. I was just curious about the letter O, and one of the lines said co-op organization in the Twin Cities or I think they call it a cult. I was like,
what other stuff is under the letter O?
O Magazine, which is Oprah's publication, of course, which actually
that's gonna be a big one.
Yeah, that would be interesting if that was taken over by the writers and editors, by the workers. But they called it a cult, and there are some cultish aspects here. But before we totally dive into that, how did this sort of system begin? We're talking like late 60s, right?
Yes. So from my fairly limited research, I haven't gotten this book by Craig Cox, which is called Storefront Revolution, Co-ops and the Counterculture, which is sort of like the book, the guy who sort of documented this movement. But a woman, so it was inspired by people who had gone to San Francisco and were inspired by Haight-Ashbury and the Diggers and the sort of society in miniature, free of exploitation, and they'd have free bulk stores and cooperatively owned everything, and we're going to have this alternative society, away from the dominant society where we can practice this. And then that was sort of as the 60s were unraveling maybe, and people were starting to have the back to the land movement, and there was people were starting to move into communes. And so a woman named Susie Schroyer and her boyfriend, or maybe I think husband, a guy named Keith Ruona, started a farm commune in Georgeville, Minnesota called Winding Road Farm. And it was there that they started growing vegetables that would then be supplying what would become North Country Co-op on Riverside Avenue in the West Bank of Minneapolis. And then and that was in 1971. And then within like 4 years, they had like 24 co-ops in Minneapolis. And these were grocery stores, but there was also, there was cooperatively owned housing and, people making clothing and childcare. It was centered around the grocery stores for sure.
Yeah. And to just give an idea about the West Bank, that area of Minneapolis, I guess from the West Bank, Cedar Riverside, kind of out to Seward a bit. This is one to this day. One of the most like far left places in the United States. They recently had a Green Party councilman who was unreelected, defeated by someone, I guess, running to his left. Is that fair to say? Who's an independent?
No, yeah, absolutely.
Right, and so this goes back. How long has it been that way? Is it go back to even further than the '60s?
Yeah. So that's sort of like, I mean, I think exactly where North Country Co-op was. I'm not sure if it would be where Ward 2 is now, or where Ward 2 is, but they border each other. I believe so. The Cedar Riverside and West Bank was the sort of Haight-Ashbury section of Minneapolis in the late '70s, or late '60s, early '70s. A lot of music venues there, but basically by the mid '90s to now, it is now like the capital of the Somali population in Minnesota, and probably like one of the touch points of the Somali diaspora besides like Mogadishu is on Cedar Riverside. And so that's Ward 6. And so like Jamal Osman, who's like, that tends to put up a Somali council member. So that might be technically where it is, but yeah, absolutely. That Seward like connects to it. They border each other. So yeah, but technically speaking, but yeah, so that is like, yeah. And there's like the Seward Cafe, which is a employee owned cafe. There's a lot of old kind of relics of the counterculture. Hard Times Cafe. Yeah, stuff like that, which Hard Times Cafe is like, yeah, it's from another era going there.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like I just got, done at the battle in Seattle getting tear gassed or something.
Yeah, no, exactly. I had a friend who recently moved here, and he was just like, yeah, I feel like that place is like 1999.
Well, it's funny because there was a informant for the RNC in 2008 who recorded conversations on behalf of the FBI in Hard Times Cafe to snitch on activists. But
not to go in too much of a digression, but my uncle's house got raided during the '08 RNC.
Oh, that was his house? Yeah. I remember seeing with the Amy Goodman was there, and he was on the welcoming committee.
They found her under the floorboards.
They had looked into him getting a bunch of shipments like of stuff which they thought were, I don't know, weapons or something, munitions, and it was pamphlets about veganism.
A more dangerous weapon than anything you'll find at a gun store.
But yes, we should shout out Robin Wansley Warlaba, who did defeat Cam Gordon and is an independent Black Democratic Socialist on the city council.
Robin, you're getting the pod damn America.
Shout out of the week.
And then we'll put in the shout out of the week.
She has a podcast, or her campaign had a podcast. Yeah.
Oh, what was it called?
Robin's Nest.
That's the great name.
That's a good one. If my name was Robin, that would be the first thing I thought of. Not like now. What were you going to say?
Alex, what were you going to say?
I had a question. Okay, so what makes this cafe feel like you're in the 90s? Is it you go in there and it's a co-op, so like the other people there are like customers and they also work there? What throws you back? Paint a picture.
You will go up to the counter. This must happen 100 times a day there. Someone goes up to the counter, starts to order, and the person, the cashier, says, write it down. And so you have to go over to a table, write down your order, hand it to the person, and then you go to pay, you take out your wallet, reach for the credit card. Again, cash only.
So the main thing is they kind of wave their finger at you.
Yeah, and they get to be... I wanted to work there. I mean, the hours seem really rough because they're open till like 3. But...
savage. You gotta love coffee.
As someone who worked in the service industry, I was very jealous of the employees there. The co-owners, the owner employees.
Yeah.
You don't have to be nice to people.
No, it's kind of part of the charm.
Yeah. But... so the co-op system... starts to get going, and yeah, as you said, they were like, "Oh, we want to be like San Francisco." Before you know it, San Francisco wants to be like Minneapolis, St. Paul, because business is booming. Well, in relatively speaking, there's a lot of these grocery stores, And they are operating in a lot of sort of hippie havens, but also in low income neighborhoods. And there's a little bit of tension and perhaps some awkwardness that still exists there. And that is part of the impetus, right, to change things and start out on a new footing. How does that proceed?
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm going off is based on this, we should say, this documentary called The Co-op Wars that kind of my article centered around, but I did some other research about it. But the way that they tell it and the way, I mean, it's pretty plausible, I guess, or intuitive, is that movement that was coming together was largely, like a lot of the New Left and Counterculture, largely white middle class. And I think a lot of the more hardcore or just more ideologically stringent or just like action oriented Marxists were saying, you know, we're just drifting into our little niche of escapism here, and we're drifting away from the working class, and we're irrelevant to the working class who are supposed to be the vanguard of our movement. And so we need to make this an explicitly ideological Marxist project. And the sort of like, you know, hinge point of the movie and what it centers around is the entry point of this guy named, which gives the movie a lot of its like intrigue, is this guy named Theophilus Smith, aka Smitty, but he has like several aliases.
Yeah,
and there's
a guy no pictures of him.
So like, the filmmakers told me in the interview they just recently found a picture of him at a SNCC rally in the South.
Wow!
So this is a black guy who had been an organizer in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the South, and then had gone up to the Revolutionary League of Black Workers in Detroit, which were like Marxist-Leninist groups that were trying to sort of agitate against the UAW at the time. And so he had this like, you know, like ideal...
Agitate, when you say against, to be...
Revolutionary Black Workers were trying to go against what they saw as like the white chauvinism in the UAW and the union movement at the time.
Okay.
That was like a movement in Detroit. It's called Dodge, the Detroit... God, I'm forgetting what the acronym is, but it became the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. But that's all to say is that this guy had a lot of leftist bona fides and came to... The way they tell it is that he found his way to Winding Road Farm and saw that what they were doing and wanted to build his cadre out of the co-op movement and wanted to turn the co-ops into a weapon against the quote monopolistic structure of the food system. And he was, you know, it was like at the time where a lot of people in the West were embracing like Marxist-Leninism and Maoism because those sort of third world revolutionary movements were seeing wins and success all around the world. And so that initiated fracture. So he gets the guy Keith Riona, the aforementioned guy who's the founder with his wife Susie Schroyer. He gets Keith on his side, and they start the co-op organization, the CO, what Anders called the O earlier, which they would later become, and they start to try to heighten the contradictions within the co-op organization and start to try to take control of it.
And how many of their critiques are valid? Because, and this is one thing I keep coming back to when I think about this, is they were saying these co-ops as they exist, they're selling health food. And that's good for you, sure, but poor people don't eat healthy food. They like the Lay's potato chips, they like the Pepsi, they like the canned foods. How valid do you think that is? Do you think that is fair? Because, you know, now it is mostly healthy at, you know, the co-ops. They sell a ton of broccoli, vegetables and stuff, but they also sell like healthy junk food too. Yeah. It's all just expensive. Do you think there is something to, like, we gotta like sell people cheap goods that they know from marketing that are like popular just to have a grounding in the community, or is there a balance to be struck there?
I think there's a balance to be struck, and this was one of the parts of it that fascinated me so much, because, and it is so interesting about the movie, is because there are sort of parts of each side that you can sort of empathize with. And to say, like, at the time there was no there was no organic, natural, processed foods, for lack of a better term, packaged foods business. This was the start of creating the movement that would then, a lot of these people would become entrepreneurs and do that, but yeah, I think so that's, Anders is alluding to that one of the cruxes of the ideological fracture within the co-op movement that the CO sort of tried to initiate was it's most of the lore, because it's such an interesting juxtaposition, is like Twinkies or tofu. Like Barbara Ehrenreich writes about this several times, or she'll reference it and call it the Twinkie Wars. It's actually like this is very like key to her PMC theory, which I know is a contested term, but it's very interesting because she's talking about, I can kind of go on her thing where she's talking about this sort of, it's not so much to say that, like, yeah, of course Twinkies are bad for you, but it's that preachiness and sanctimoniousness that comes with the sort of, we know what's best for you sort of thing. And I think what the CO was trying to do was meet people where they're at to build the, working class power to take over, and then we can figure out the food later. It's like I think they said in some of their papers, like, working class, poor people, oppressed people have bigger problems than sugar and white flour, or, whatever. But like, that's also, it's sort of specious, because we know how much poor nutrition and food access hurts poor people. But
right,
there's also like the thing that I always think about in these debates is that there was a study out of Stanford a couple of years ago that I always think about, that showed that it's not so much about access and education, about sort of like getting poor people to have healthy food, or bringing accessibility and education. It's more so that poorer people have less money to spend on luxuries and leisure time. And so you can get a lot more out of like a 2 liter of soda and a big bag of Lay's, and you can feel like you're a good parent, and it tastes good. And it's like, and that just shows that we need to just improve the bottom line for everybody, basically. Yeah. And so that's where I kind of get to it. But it's, on one hand, it is good that these co-ops existed, and they had kept alive a network of organic farmers, but they let them, like, they kept the thing that was just easiest to be co-opted. They sort of, like,
no pun intended.
Oh, God damn. Yeah. Jesus Christ. As they, as it grew, after this fracture happened. So that's the main thing, is that, like, a lot of it is about the food issue, but a big thing that was revealed in the movie, and that if you look into it as well, they were also really, and this is also harkens to debates of today, is that they were very critical of the sort of leaderless, like, horizontal decision-making structure. Right. Yeah. And they wanted to instill something closer to like democratic centralism, basically, and to have it be more hierarchical. And the producer, Eric Essie, the executive producer of the movie, who's sort of the guy who's the creator of it, who's probably done the most research on it, he was saying that because of how serious they were about actually systematizing things, they actually made them get their act together. And that's why they were able to actually catch on with a lot of the rank and file and people who worked in the stores. So we should say that the CO forms, and then they are ascendant for a bit. Like they are like actually taking control, and they form an alliance with a guy named Mo Burton, which is sort of what you were talking about, that they open the Bryant Central Co-op in South Minneapolis. This is actually in the neighborhood where George Floyd was killed in South Minneapolis, the historically black area of South Minneapolis. And Mo Burton is a former Black Panther, and he makes an alliance with the CO. The CO helps him open this co-op. And so he's sort of their, like, you know, their main authentic link to the working class, you could say, or to, you know, oppressed people in Minneapolis.
Right. So they are trying to build solidarity with the broader community and establish a footing in the rank and file of this co-op movement, but their means are not entirely democratic. They are accused eventually of going too far. What are some of those tactics that they end up using and sort of imposing on the...
So they basically try to make their big move at the meeting at the People's Warehouse. So there's a warehouse in Minneapolis that's like the distribution center for all of these other co-ops that I mentioned, that like all the food goes there and then it's distributed out. And so they're like, you know, if we can take control of that, we can take control of the whole thing, the whole network. And they go to this meeting and they try to take it over in the meeting. And then after the meeting, they roll up with like steel pipes. And this is where, you know, it's just like, when you're hearing about the story, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And the fun, like one of the most memorable parts of the movie for me is, this is Mo Burton's nephew, this guy named Gary Cunningham, who was now like a very buttoned up nonprofit executive, who's also the husband of the former Minneapolis mayor, Betsy Hodges.
Right.
Him telling with a steel pipe about to like crack some hippie's skull, telling them that they need to have some third world leadership. And I was just like, that's just incredible that it was just amazing. And so they take control, you know, they seize control of it, but there's like a backlash. And then there's just like a series of escalating confrontations that involves car bombs, fist fights. Yeah.
I missed the car bomb part. Wow.
So the CO's escalating tactics ends up alienating Mo Burton. And then Mo Burton says, okay, I'm just taking this. Bryant Central Co-op is mine. You know, like, fuck, you know, you guys are like, I can't take you guys seriously anymore. And then they car bomb Mo Burton's car for that. And then they try to take over the Bryant Central Co-op. And then, like, the way the documentary puts it, him and some of his guys whooped their ass.
Wow. I missed the car bomb part. That was in the documentary?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Shit. Oh. Yeah, so after that, it seems like there's also a city council member.
Yeah,
at
Ed
the
Feline,
time.
who I didn't even know that this guy was a city council member. I know him as the editor of the publisher and editor of the Southside Pride, which is like a South Minneapolis community newspaper. And he's just kind of a crank, like, no, like, for lack of a better term, I just know him as sort of a crank columnist who's like kind of entertaining to read, but I'm like half, you know, you're sort of like, yeah.
What are some of the things that he writes about now?
I can't remember. It's just like city issues. Like, it's just like his version of a hot take about like the city council or anything from, you know, upzoning to defund the police to wherever, whatever. But so this guy, Ed Feline, is a city councilman who says in the movie that he was a Marxist city council member. Mm-hmm. Or like he was trying to be an ally to the struggle of Marxism within the city council, maybe is how he puts it. And he is for the CO. And so he's like an ally for them. So he can kind of like pull strings for them. And then they end up alienating him as well. So they sort of, they maybe heightened the contradictions too fast. And it just seems very of that time. That it was a time of a lot of small sects that sort of became cults.
Yeah.
And it's,
Well, it's a bit hard to tell for the documentary who the ringleader is, but one of the only people in it who's still unapologetic about the actions of the CO, even the more contradiction heightening ones, is this woman, I think Lynette something, I'm forgetting her name. But just judging sort of superficially, this seems like sort of a woman who is from the upper middle class and, presents her, like the way she talks and things. It sounds like this is sort of a buttoned up person who's still talking about like, well, they were trying to do things the good old fashioned American democratic way, and that's not how change happens. And yeah, it's all these polite old Minnesotan people talking about, Marxist.
It's so wild. I mean, it's such it's just like a funny documentary because it's all these boomers like just being like at the like, so when the CO starts to like fade away and the guy Keith is like, so I took my Mao and I dropped in all my literature and I dropped it off at his house, and there's like these like somber guitars, and it's so funny. Yeah, so that's what I sort of think is that they like really like so the movie, and this is kind of one of the critiques I had, it sort of presents the CO as having confused racial politics and being able to be like put under the spell almost of this guy Theo Smith because he's this like charismatic radical black guy. But I think both sides had confused racial politics and confused class politics and didn't really know, like, we're overcompensating and not really knowing how to build a base or alienating their base or getting ahead of it, like they were doing too much like speaking for the working class instead of speaking to, sort of thing.
Yeah, and that really, I really feel like this really did resonate with me as a white leftist in 2021, because this is something that happens every day. Someone will sort of appoint themselves the voice of the working class, and you guys don't get it. You're not. If you're from my background, you'd understand that this such and such a tactic isn't working. And then you have someone from with the same exact sort of credentials, so to speak, saying, no, if you were actually authentically this thing, then you would know that it is working. And like, it's just this reductionist sort of back and forth. But that's a good point, that there were on both sides, and the documentary kind of does. It's funny when each person is speaking on the lower thirds, they have a little symbol, like the hammer and sickle if they were on the CO, and then like a green peace
peace sign.
Yeah, if they were the hippies, so called. But so you think that the class composition, the racial composition, was about even on either sort of end of the split?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think so, but I think that at least the CO they had a genuine like desire and sort of like objective to engage that, but it just seemed like a lot of the hippies, and then the way it ended up happening was just drifted farther and farther away from these co-ops having any kind of like political identity, let alone having that be the center of it. Right. There's one thing I should like. This is an interesting quote I found from one of the newspapers. This is also an interesting thing. It was such a time for like independent publishing, because each side had newspapers that they would just like flame each other and write these like really serious position papers, like going back and forth. And they said, so this is from the co-op newspaper, The Scoop. So this is about a meeting in 1975. And they said, independent Marxists criticized the CO for divisive tactics, for serious tactical mistakes, misusing and obviously misunderstanding Marxism. A couple Marxists explained, sometimes extremely emotionally, how they've tried very hard to get into the CO's movement but could not due to their different tactics and style. Personal slanders, disruptions, and shattering of the community were pointed out. So that kind of gets in, and that's something that the filmmaker told me, is that like there were some critics of it that were also communists or radicals that were just like these people are just a little like out, they're just too out there, and they're a little bit, which they became. And we should say that the CO became the O, which did become something that resembled something more like a cult. And there's actually a woman named Alexandra Stein who was a member, who is now a scholar of cults, who like wrote a memoir. Yeah.
So what did they go off to do? Did they stay in Minnesota?
So a lot of them went, like a lot of new left, like socialists and communists, they went to go join the industrial proletariat in like other cities. Mm-hmm. But then others, I think the whoever stayed, it just became an increasingly more insular group. I'm not sure. I think they may have stayed in Minnesota, but they went underground. And the filmmakers told me that the last someone had heard of the guy Smitty, Theo Smith, was that one of the other CO members that they had talked to was saw him working in northern Minnesota on like as like part of like a road crew.
Wow.
As like a public worker. And so it's interesting because there are some CO members that are like, obviously we're down to talk for the movie. And one of the guys, Dean Zimmerman, actually became a Green Party city councilman, and then I didn't know he did time. He took a bribe and then went to jail. Just crazy.
I was looking on Wikipedia. Yeah, I saw. It's funny how like people like the Green Party in the U.S. is mostly non-existent as far as actual power and office holders, but Minneapolis is one of the few cities where there actually did have, I guess now it's kind of gone or waning, but they did have a grasp on some political power there with city council people, and Annie Young, who was on sort of the hippie side and went on. I remember her being the parks counselor, which if you're a Green Party person running for any office, you should choose parks commissioner, because that's the easiest one to get elected to, I think, if you're a Green. But is that kind of where the political element of the co-op movement went? Is into the Green Party, especially in like the 90s, early 2000s?
That's a good question. That I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Like where that exactly went. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting too, especially coming back to how it relates to today, because it's hard to imagine this actually doing what they thought it would do, which is roll over capitalism just from these grocery stores. But is there anything they could have done differently that would have perhaps been? I mean, obviously the co-ops are still around, but I don't know that they're really threatening the system in the way that they set out to. But as they say at the end of the movie, it's possible that could be the case, that we could see a revival in cooperative businesses. And I know a lot of millennials who certainly would love to see that and talk about cooperative economics. How do you think that would happen, and how could they have gone about things differently?
Yeah, I don't know about how gone things, like, so the how the story goes sort of is like as it was told to me, is that this conflict was so traumatic that it hastened a turn away from like an apolitical turn in co-ops. And so as they grew, and then they became less having that in their identity. And you could even say in their brand identity. And as we get into the 80s and 90s, and there starts to be a mainstreaming of health food, and then you start to grow into like, and so if you turn that health food, if you take away any sort of political valence to it, whether it's like farmers' rights, like even holding corporations accountable, like if there isn't some kind of fair trade, some kind of but like more explicit than that, if you keep it solely to consumer politics, like you're just hastening the ability for Whole Foods to come in and just like I'm going to refrain from saying that word, but swoop in and take all of your business, because there's nothing that separates you from the rest of the market, you know. So as the 90s, as health food becomes more mainstreamed, co-ops start, I mean, they're like, they have a niche audience who knows that it's good that they go to a co-op, but then like everyone else who just wants, like, knows that the food is good would go to Whole Foods, and Whole Foods can take over, and they're run by a ruthless, you know, union busting libertarian, who occasionally debates Richard Wolff and Bhaskar Sankara about capitalism.
Right.
And then bought by Jeff Bezos. So like, and so now, so how the filmmakers put it to me, who have two guys who have worked in the like co-ops and in the co-op sort of area ecosystem, is that now that, and I should say, I also have a friend who works for regional co-op grocers who like actually sees a lot of the numbers. And he told me that there's more sales of natural food products in major retail stores now than in co-ops. So what, like, and so if they don't, like, people can go elsewhere, like you can get organic stuff at Target, you know,
Right.
If people can go elsewhere now, what does a co-op offer? And so a lot of co-ops are now with, you know, cooperative economics and alternatives to at least like corporate capitalism are becoming more popular, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Co-ops are maybe starting to embrace that more, but I'm a little bit skeptical of that. We'll see. I one thing that I didn't put in my article just for space, but was they chose to close their film with the story of this co-op that opens pretty close in that area of South Minneapolis in a majority Black neighborhood. And it's the Seward co-op, and they don't sign a community benefits agreement, but then they sort of come to an agreement and they try to tie it in a bow. But another way to look at the Seward was that in 2018, the Seward co-op employees unionized. And if you look at a lot of the testimonies of the workers, it wasn't a very good place to work. And the Seward co-op board was very hesitant, and employed a lot of union busting tactics. And so that's not what you would want from a co-op. You know, you'd think that would be antithetical to co-ops, that at the very least, if you can't be pro-labor in your own place. So I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's a lot of young radical people working in the co-ops in Minneapolis today, but I don't know what the potential of them is. I hope, you know, this film and people learning about this can be some sort of a intervention.
Right. It seems in a way, it's funny you mentioned Target, because I won't name the co-op, but my mom said she saw one of the owners or managers from a co-op shopping at Target to buy shit that he was going to sell in a co-op. But this is a long time ago.
You know, I'm hearing that. You know what I'm doing, Anders? No.
Wagging your finger. Yeah. But it is, so when people hear co-op, I guess, especially with, you know, the Richard Wolves and that stuff, we're thinking employee owned, and these aren't necessarily like
so
that.
That's another thing that turn, which was also, they got professionalized, is that a lot of the co-ops back in the day were worker, like you volunteered for your share as the owner, worker owner. It changed into a consumer owner, customer owner model. Right. So I should say that was a major difference in how things happened. Like, I think now there's still like places like the Park Slope Co-op, which is like, you know, legendary for their having to volunteer 6 hours a week, or, you know,
you literally can't buy
there's a Broad
anything.
City episode, you know, like,
yeah. I tried to go in there once. I was just like, I just need a seltzer. Can I buy that? And they're like, are you a member? No, you cannot buy this one thing, even though you have $1 in front of me. You cannot buy anything unless you're an actual member who does a shift there. It's crazy.
Yeah,
they should sell to you, but like at the cost of treating you like a dirty dog. Like you pay a dignity fee.
Right. You should have to write down the seltzer that you're getting and hand them the slip of paper.
You have to write on the paper, I couldn't find this in the trash where I get most of my food, so I would like your seltzer for $5.
Right.
And I say all these critiques of co-op as someone who goes to these co-ops, you know, weekly for my entire life. So I'm talking about myself as much as anyone.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, my parents go to Mississippi Market all the time, and they say their little number at the register, and it goes into some account thing, and you get charged an extra 30 cents or whatever it is every time you buy something, and then you get like a dividend at the end of the year for, I don't know, what, $20, something like that. It's not a ton of money. I guess it's slightly better than straight up Whole Foods, but yeah, right. It's definitely not the vision that they had set out, but based on, you know, what's happening with young people now and the way people are viewing capitalism, and, you know, the base of employees and customers in these places, maybe we're due for a renovation in the cooperative system in the Twin Cities.
One thing that the filmmaker Eric Essie told me, then this is from like marketing data when he was an employee, he said that it's actually more so, and this is going to sound very familiar, more so than race or class, it's level of education, correspondence to whether you shop at a co-op. So, and that goes to the, you know, PMC theory that Barbara Ehrenreich was sort of, this was the time that she was writing about, of this sort of split and people not really knowing how to relate together. And so, yeah, it's that's what's fascinating about it. I'm like, this is such a historical snapshot with so much lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a key point there, is like a lot of times, you know, in socialists today, they'll go back to this refrain, which is true, that, you know, under a Marxist definition, you're working class if you don't own capital. So in theory, we should be able to just, boom, band together. We're all in the same class, and that's what we're striving to do. But it doesn't happen like clockwork. If you're from a different background as someone else, you may have to speak in a different way. So, yeah, a lot of great lessons from this movie. It's on YouTube, narrated by Peter Coyote.
Hey, who was an OG digger?
Right.
I didn't know who. It's kind of a nice full circle, because he inspired the movement.
We should maybe say who the Diggers are, too. I just realized.
The Diggers were they were a street theater troupe, but they were the ones who were sort of pulling the strings a lot behind a lot of Haight-Ashbury and making a lot of it possible. And then I'm probably close to wrapping up, but one thing that people have brought up to me in conversations about seeing it are questioning whether Smitty was some kind of agent or asset or something.
What do you think?
Which I hadn't considered at all, but is interesting.
If you had to guess, what would you say on that question?
Probably not.
Right. That is one of those things where, obviously, around that time, very common for subversion of the left on the part of the government, but like that's also was kind of the point, was to get us, being the left, to suspect everybody else of being an op.
I mean, I'm very like, it's very plausible that all of that just could have happened on its own. You know, didn't need to have. But some people did bring that up to me, and I thought it was an interesting. I'm reading that book Chaos right now, so it's all in my mind.
I mean, that's why you can never solve these things, right? Is because it's also plausible that it was a carefully orchestrated op, or almost equally so.
Right.
Well, speaking of which, before we let you go, I do want to ask one question on this topic. Since you're a Minnesota political journalist, who do you think killed Paul Wellstone?
I'm going to defer to Immortal Technique on that.
Ah, okay.
This is how Anders ends every podcast.
Well, it's what I wanted to do an episode about that.
Have you ever looked? You know that like former UMD professor.
Yes, and I was gonna buy that book, and then it turns out he's a Holocaust denier.
Yeah, I know. You look into him, and you're like, this is interesting, and then he's a Holocaust denier and Sandy Hook truther, and you're like, okay,
the rabbit hole goes too deep.
But there's something weird about that plane crash. Anyway, we'll have you back for your long tome that you write about the Wellstone assassination. But what else are you working on, and where can people find you?
So yeah, as you alluded to at the beginning, I am just in the second week of a new. I'm an editorial fellow at Mother Jones magazine, so
Nice.
I have a job after not thinking I would ever get a job in media. So it's pretty amazing.
There you go.
So I'm just working the 9 to 5 for now, but find me on Twitter. First and last name is my @
We'll have that in the episode description.
and racketmn.com if you want to read the article. It's an interview with the filmmakers, and then a bit of what I just said here.
Yeah, we will link to that along with the movie. You should check it out. And I did want to ask too. It ends on a great song that I tried looking up and couldn't find. Do you know what the closing credit song was?
I remember so dearly the times gone by. It's a dream that I just can't let go.